And welcome everyone to the US Web Design System monthly call for May 2024. This month we've got a red USWDS logo reminiscent of both the roses blooming out here in Oregon and of poppies of remembrance in honor of Memorial Day. Slide 2. My name is Dan Williams, he, him, and I'm the USWDS project lead. And here on screen is my avatar: dark hair, blue sweater, collared shirt. Today, my physical self is notably wearing glasses. Apparently, I now need computer glasses so I don't get headaches. Maybe I'll update my avatar next month. And as Jeannie mentioned, we are recording this call, and I'm happy to say we've started to be able to share the recordings of these monthly calls publicly. You can find pretty much everything from the last year's worth of monthly calls back to January 2023 on our website at designsystem.digital.gov/about/monthly-calls. We typically post videos shortly after the monthly call, and we also link out to the slides and script hosted at Digitalgov. We've posted a link to our monthly call page in the chat. We'll be posting other links and references into the chat as we go along, and I encourage you to ask questions in the chat at any time. If any member of our team can answer your question in the chat, we'll do so. Otherwise, there'll be some time for questions and answers at the end of the hour. Also, be sure to introduce yourself in the chat as well. It's nice to know who's here. And it's good to have you here today. For those of you who find the chat distracting, you're welcome to close or hide the chat window during the main presentation. You can reopen it later during the Q&A session at the end of the call. So thanks. And with that, let's get started. Slide 3. So what's our agenda for today? Well, we've got a nice site to feature and some really quick product updates so we can spend the bulk of our time with our special guest talking about accessibility in civic spaces, and hopefully still have time for Q&A. Slide 4. So let's get into it with featured sites. Slide 5. Today we're looking at eac.gov, home of the United States Election Assistance Commission, an independent bipartisan commission whose mission is to help election officials improve the administration of elections and help Americans participate in the voting process. As we'll learn a bit later in the call, the EAC was established by the Help America Vote Act of 2002 and is charged with developing guidance to meet the Act's requirements, adopting voluntary voting system guidelines, and serving as a national clearinghouse of information on election administration. The EAC also has a really nice USWDS implementation that they launched last summer. Their site features a clear, solid design, a language selector in the top right, and the headline, Voting Experiences Since HAVA, Perspectives of People with Disabilities. Check it out. Slide 6. So congratulations and great work. Be sure to let our team know when a new site launches, either with an email or a note on the USWDS public Slack channel. Or if you have a site that we've never featured before and like, hey, you should call it out, let us know that too. It doesn't necessarily have to be the newest thing in the world. Slide 7. So now for a few quick product updates. Slide 8. So next week, we'll be releasing USWDS 3.8.1. This will be a nice little bug fix patch release addressing, among other things, an issue with input mask not working in some situations, some focus issues with the validation component, and a number of nice improvements to the functionality of Tooltip. So keep your eyes peeled for USWDS 3.8.1 next week. Slide 9. Next, we're going to be trying something different for our August monthly call. I know it's a few months away, but after we come back from July break, we're going to have a community choice call. We're soliciting your feedback in a GitHub discussion starting now to help us understand what's important to you and to build a monthly call around it. So if you've got opinions, share them in the discussion link we're posting in the chat, and we'll get into it in August. Slide 10. We've also just published 3 new accessibility test pages: character count, prose, and tag, and we have a bunch more we're working to publish in the coming weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for more accessibility test pages now and over the course of the month. Slide 11. And finally, as you probably already know, today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. If you don't already know that, today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and it's a stroke of good fortune that its home on the third Thursday in May always lines up with our monthly call. Today, I'm hoping we can raise some awareness about critical accessibility work that's happening in a part of government that has some important parallels with the work we all do. And is particularly relevant this year, and that's the world of elections. Today, we've got a special guest with some deep experience in accessibility, civic design, and elections. Slide 12. So to get started, I'd like to introduce our USWDS accessibility team and our special guest for today. They all happen to be in the same place today, Austin, Texas, for an accessibility conference. But through the magic of the internet today, they all can appear like they're in different places. So we'll start with Amy Cole. Amy, are you here? Amy's an accessibility specialist on the USWDS core team and a contractor. Hey, there you are, Amy. Amy, can you introduce yourself and give a quick self-description?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. My name's Amy Cole, and I am a white woman with curly brown shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing a yellow floral top, and my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you, Amy. Good to have you here today. Slide 13. Next, I'd like to introduce Alex Hall. Alex is also an accessibility specialist on the USWDS core team and a contractor. Alex, can you introduce yourself and give a quick self-description?
Yes. Hello, y'all. My name is Alex. I am also a digital accessibility specialist, just like Amy, contracted with USWDS. I'm a Black woman with dark brown shoulder length locked hair, and I'm wearing a collared white shirt underneath a red jumper.
Awesome. Great to have you here today, Alex. Slide 14. And finally, I'm very pleased to introduce Whitney Quesenbery. Whitney is the co-founder and director of the Center for Civic Design. Center for Civic Design is a nonpartisan nonprofit working with state and local elections offices and community organizations to make all the materials of democracy clear and usable. Whitney, welcome. Can you give a quick self-description for the folks who might not be looking at their screens?
Hi, this is Whitney. I'm a white woman with formerly red hair. I have on a burgundy flowered shirt and I wear glasses. I use she and they pronouns.
Great. Thank you, Whitney. It's so good to have you here today. Slide 15. It's really great that you're able to join us today. The accessibility of civic spaces and of the voting process in particular is of special interest to me. And today on Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2024, I'm really excited to have you come and speak with our community of designers and developers and other practitioners who are, focused on delivering accessible, easy to use websites and services. There's considerable overlap, I think, between the work you've supported and the work we're supporting here. And it's a perspective I hope we can integrate into our work. Today, we're going to have a little bit of a moderated Q&A with Whitney to start, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions from the audience at the end. And I'd like to pass it over to Amy Cole to get us started. Amy.
Yeah, this is Amy. Thanks, Dan, and thanks for being here today, Whitney. First, a little bit of context. So, Whitney, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure enough. Hi, this is Whitney again. Thanks so much, Amy, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. As Dan mentioned earlier, I'm the co-founder and director of the Center for Civic Design. Before that, however, I was a UX researcher starting in the early days of hypertext and have worked with organizations like the National Cancer Institute, IEEE, the International Engineering Organization, Amtrak, and the UK's Open University. I'm also the co-author of A Web for Everyone, a book that looks at how accessibility is integrated into the design process. My transition into civic design and elections started in 2000 with a presidential election that hinged in part on the usability of ballot design. If folks remember phrases like butterfly ballot and hanging chad, it's likely because of the 2000 election. The civic space is also where I got serious about accessibility and learned that if it's not your job, whose job should it be? Accessibility is a big issue in elections because elections are in the center of democracy. For many people with a disability, the new voting systems introduced after 2002 were the first time they were able to vote independently and privately.
This is Alex. Thanks again, Whitney. So first, Whitney, how do you approach accessibility from a conceptual and a practical standpoint.
Hi there, Whitney again. Well, writing a book actually forces you to decide what you really think because you're putting it down in black and white. For me, it was a part of a shift from thinking about accessibility as a series of rules or conformance to thinking about it as part of UX design based on principles and personas. As a principle, we can think about accessibility as usability for more people. Practically, things like accessibility standards are really important because they set a baseline and because what's measured is a way of agreeing about what matters. But compliance with Section 508 or WCAG is just the baseline, no matter how hard it is to get there. We should aim for delight.
This is Amy again. I'd love to touch more on the concept of compliance versus, as what you said, delight in accessible design. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Hi, Whitney again. So let's start with a kind of measurement problem. Start from a way of measuring things. Problem reports and severity scales for usability and accessibility issues. Most organizations I've worked with have vague qualitative classifications: critical, serious, moderate, minor. That works as a kind of shorthand, but they lose some of the specificity that helps everyone on a team recognize what the stakes are for the people we work for. The problem is that accessibility is not about ease of use, but ability to use it all. There are real consequences for real people. And on slide 16, here's a way we might think about it. Instead of critical, let's call them slam doors, right? Barriers that stop someone from using an app or a feature successfully or using it at all. These must be fixed, especially in a government app or form that everyone uses or might be required to use. Instead of serious, let's call them frustrating. Problems that slow someone down or force them into workarounds. They ask users to do our work and add unacknowledged burden to interactions with the government. Instead of moderate, let's call them annoying. Things that make the experience less pleasant, maybe even unpleasant enough to leave, especially with the slow or fast drip of the kinds of easily fixed problems that people with disabilities run into all the time. Finally, instead of minor, let's call them noisy. These little issues that damage credibility, but are unlikely to cause serious problems, the typos of interface and interaction design. Far, far too many sites are full of these really basic problems that either are noisy or annoying. Missing alt text, sloppy form coding, text that's hard to read for contrast. It's easy to discount the challenge they pose, but things that are speed bumps for some people can become mountains for others. And they're also not delightful. The idea of designing for delight is just as important in official or business apps as in games. As one expert put it, designing for delight begins with a balance of small pleasures and consideration. For everybody, but especially for people with disabilities, it's a signal that their needs for accessibility have been considered. So on slide 17, you'll see what I think of as the delight matrix. It's a two-way matrix of bad and good experience versus low and high expectations. In the bottom right corner, there's that black hole, low expectations and a bad experience. It's a kind of success. You've met their worst expectations. But as we move counterclockwise, there's the pleasant surprise when low expectations meet a good experience. It's the moment when the blue sky peeks out from behind the clouds. At this point, you can stop thinking about the basics of accessibility and start thinking about the needs that go along with different abilities and with different types of users with disabilities who come with different perspectives. Next, you might continue on improving your site, getting better, and you may have that horrible moment or that great moment when high expectations meet a good experience. That's where everybody should be, right? Expectations are being met, but in a good way. But there's also a danger at that point, which is that things change over time. Once people start to expect a good experience, the fall from that peak to a bad experience is an uh-oh moment. It's frustrating at best and makes people angry at worst. So to take this out of the abstract, let's stop a minute and think about what delight might look like. How many of you fly? Probably most of us at some point, some of you a lot. If you're like me, selecting seats can be one of those small pleasures. I used to travel a lot, and I have my favorite seats on specific aircraft, not just favorite seats at all. So on slide 18, you can see a seat map that you might use to choose your seat on when you book a flight. One day, I got an email from a blind friend. She'd been planning a trip, and she wrote to me excitedly to say, I chose my own seat on an airplane. Because seat maps are spatial, and they're usually presented as a kind of visual map. And for years, they simply weren't accessible at all. But if we look at them through the experience of two personas, these are from a Web for Everyone, by the way, and are freely available to everyone, you can see how they aren't accessible to someone with a visual disability like Jacob. But they can also be critical to someone with a mobility disability like Emily. Anyway, making the feature accessibility, the seat selection feature accessible probably didn't just happen. Someone had to decide to do it, design it, program it, test it, all signs of consideration to people's needs.
Great. This is Alex again. You said accessibility is not about quote unquote ease of use, but quote, ability to use it all. And I'm curious about your thoughts on where usability and accessibility intersect. Could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, Whitney again. So according to the ISO Standards Organization, accessibility is really usability for people with the widest range of capabilities. But on slide 9, I want to start with what a definition of disability is. This is from the World Health Organization, and it says, and I've shortened it somewhat, that a disability is the outcome of the interaction between a person and the environmental or attitudinal barriers they may face. This definition didn't come apart by magic. It's a shift from the medical definition of disability as a medical condition to a social one focused on the impact of the person. This was an eye-opening moment for me because I'm not a medical professional, but I do create interactions. And so instead of disability being something I can't do anything about, it's something that's actually in the center of my professional work. So if we take that and move into slide 20 and definitions of accessibility and usability, for a long time, people would say it's accessible if it meets the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. But that's not a really helpful definition, and it doesn't refer to people. The ISO 9241 series on the ergonomics of human-computer interaction, by the way, not a very delightful name, includes the classic definition of usability as the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction with which a specified set of users can achieve a specified set of tasks in a particular environment. Okay, that just means the people who should be able to use something can. When they integrated accessibility into the series in part 20, they created a definition that ties accessibility and usability together by defining accessibility as the usability of a product, service, environment, or facility by people with the widest range of capabilities. In other words, usability for more people. So our goal has to be to make usability for all as wide as possible and make sure that the people at the edges of that, where people actually need assistance, is as narrow as possible. So on slide 21, I visualize this through a kind of normal distribution curve, right? At the peak, in the middle, we have usability. That's the people who can use the product kind of as delivered in default, exactly where they are. And then we move down further to accessibility, when you can include people who are where there's options within the app that they can use. So we're considering a wider range of capabilities. Sometimes we can't meet that goal. And the next step out towards the end is accommodation. That's when there's an alternative that addresses accessibility needs, but it's separate. Think about a ramp to a side door versus everyone being able to get in through the front door, or a different, though perhaps equally good solution, but separate. And when even that doesn't work, what we're left with is assistance. That doesn't sound so bad, but it takes away independence. And that word independence resonates a lot in my world of elections, because federal law says that voters with disabilities must be able to vote, to mark and cast a ballot, with the same privacy and independence as other voters. So let's look at this and what happens in a polling location on slide 22. Assistance is what we used to have. Someone had to help a voter mark a ballot, especially blind voters. This is neither private nor independent, so I haven't included an illustration for this. Accommodation is represented with a sign and a bell for curbside voting shown on a screen as a sign outside a building. These are often used in polling places where, for instance, the entrance may not be accessible or there's stairs inside the building. It's the genesis of what we call curbside voting, where poll workers bring a ballot out to someone in their car who maybe for some reason can't get into the polling place. I've represented accessibility by showing part of a row of voting machines where you can see in the background in a high school gym, a man standing at a booth where he's probably hand marking a ballot, but next to him is a table with an accessible machine at it where someone can sit down, and presumably that machine has accessibility features built into it. It may have different features, but it's spatially presented as an equal option. And finally, all the way on the right is universal design, that is full accessibility and usability, represented by a photo of a voting system with a screen. You can just maybe make out a tactile controller and headsets designed to be used by all voters, including voters with disabilities. You may have heard of the curb cut effect, where something designed for accessibility turns out to be valuable and usable for everyone. And that's really the goal of universal design and trying to make the world accessible. So jumping to slide 23, this is a demonstration model. It was not a real voting system, but it was a demonstration model built with a gaming systems adaptive controller as the tactile controller. The controls turned out to be inviting and very intuitive for everyone, not just people with disabilities. It was actually interesting to see how, when testing something that was described as a voting system, people would get really engaged in interacting with it rather than confused.
That's great. That's wonderful, Whitney. This is Amy again. I'd love to touch more on the concept of compliance versus delight in accessible design. Can you expand a little bit more about that?
Sure, back to me again. And just a little quick disclaimer, I'm going to be talking about work I've done with the Election Assistance Commission and with NIST. I was never a member of the Election Assistance Commission, and I certainly don't speak for that federal agency. I'm talking from my own perspective as a former committee member. So one of the big turning points in my professional career was when I was appointed to a federal advisory committee for the EAC. I'm going to say it as an acronym. For me, it was a close-up look at how government works and how things like standard can bring change, even not as quickly as the redheaded I was really wanted. I also should say that many of my friends warned me against being on this committee. They thought standards stifle innovation. They thought they were sort of a foolish consistency that was a hobgoblin of little minds, as the poet Emerson put it. But Emerson simply meant that following conventional wisdom is what's foolish. Standards that don't leave room for future innovation and other developments also don't leave any room for delight. And so we worked on it. All this work happened because the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, passed in 2002, which established the Election Assistance Commission and gave them a mandate to create new standards for voting systems. They also mandated that they have an advisory committee of experts and industry representatives. I was the chair for human factors and privacy, including usability and accessibility, from 2004 to 2007. I'm proud of that work, and I'm really proud of how it has changed elections to understand accessibility better. In the words of HAVA, for those who like numbers, it's chapter 301, section A3, are that the voting system shall be accessible for individuals with disabilities, including non-visual accessibility for the blind and visually impaired, in a manner that provides the same opportunity for access and participation, including privacy and independence, as for other voters. That's a big charge, and we all took it quite seriously. I was on the committee during the time we wrote the first version 1.0 and most of the 1.1 version of the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, the VVSG. In usability and accessibility, we had a little bit of an advantage, which is that we started from an almost blank page. There were two existing requirements for accessibility in an industry standard. There had been some preliminary work on a standard at IEEE, and of course we had Section 508 and WCAG to draw on. While we were working, WCAG 2.0 was passed just in that period of time, just to place it in time. After I left the committee, I've continued working as a researcher and supporting the voting team at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which works with the EAC. I want to mention just a few things about how the standards were developed and how we tried to build in both a possibility of future innovation and delight. On slide 24, there's just an example of how we organized the standard into broad principles with supporting requirements like 5.1a. Within any method of voting, all display formats, including enhanced visual and audio, and all interaction modes, including tactile and limited dexterity, must have the same functionality as the visual format and touch mode, including voting, verification, and casting. That would be a very hard requirement to test for in a voting system, but it becomes the basis for many other requirements, and provides a rationale for why the specific technical requirements exist. The second thing is that VVSG 2.0 was developed with a public working group that ran for a couple of years that included experts, advocates, manufacturers and vendors, and election officials. As a complement to that, NIST ran a program of research on specific areas where there was little existing material to draw on. The goal was to both anticipate needs for writing the standards and to kick off discussions. And finally, out of those discussions, NIST also published a handbook for usability and accessibility testing, specific advice that was tailored to testing voting systems. And we're actually seeing it get a lot of attention. So I'm pleased about that. And I see they're dropping the link in the chat.
Cool. This is Alex again. I'd love to dig a little more into what comes after these standards and design. Could you expand a little bit more on that for us?
Sure, Whitney again. You know, you spend so much time writing the standard and then, you have to send it out into the world. But let's start with something really simple. And that's the idea that what's measured matters. So this is the value of being a bit of a nerd about data and working in a field that is very nerdy about data. A simple example. One of the things we do at CCD is we help states design their envelopes and the instructions for voting by mail. We might think it's great design, but how do we know that that design is actually effective? Obviously, usability testing is the first step, right? But even on a relatively small scale, it can help us find the concepts and details that can trip up voters. And as we work in different places, that the knowledge effect is cumulative, right? As our knowledge grows, even with the inevitable variations in a federalized system, as we design one after another, because elections are similar everywhere. But the real test happens in action, right? When that envelope and those instructions are used in a real election. Do our designs help things like reduce the number of ballots that can't be counted because a voter forgot to sign or date their envelope, or missed that they had to supply their mother's maiden name? Yep, that's a real requirement in a state. We can get anecdotal evidence about that, but the only meaningful answer is in robust data collection. So that lets us look at a state over time, so before and after a change, but it also lets us look at them in comparison to other states. The EAC collects a lot of this data through what's called the Election Administration Voting Survey, or EVES. It's run every other year with input from all 55 states, DC, and territories. The survey itself is designed with a process with public input. The data is public. The EAC hosts an interactive tool to explore the data, but so do others. For example, the MIT Election Performance Index is a popular view of the data. It's one of my favorite because combined with other sources like the US Census Current Population Survey, it's a kind of league table for elections. It tracks 22 indicators of election performance since 2008. For things like wait times, voter registration and turnout, the number of mail ballots rejected, so make some high and low things. And it lets us look in a very broad way at the impact of policy, right? The questions get reviewed each cycle and they get adjusted to ask about new problems, to look at hot topics from the previous election. This year, for example, there's new questions about accessible voting by mail. 35 states now have some form of this fast-growing new voting method with more details about policies. We can actually learn more about what's working and what isn't as more states come online.
This is Amy again. Whitney, could you give us any examples of how government is experimenting with accessible voting systems?
Sure. This is my favorite part, is seeing some of these things happen in action. So I want to take us to the city of Los Angeles and talk about what they've done. This is slide 25 for those following along. Way over on the left in the little tiny, we'd like to forget them pictures, is the Votomatic Inca Vote, a sort of adapted punch card system that LA used to use. And over on the right is something that took them 12 or so years to design and build and launch a new voting system. It seems like forever, 12 years, but what they did was remarkable and had not been done before. First of all, they started with a very focused voter-focused process with broad community and expert input. The research they did included not just voters and not just policy and not just politicians, but administratively needs down to occupational safety for the voters setting up the machines. They also knew that California was moving to vote centers and to more vote by mail, which changes the nature of a polling place. So they were able to think about designing for approximately 1,500 voting locations rather than the 4,500 polling locations they used to have, often in people's garages or very temporary facilities and set up by volunteers. The vote by mail design came first, and they launched that in 2008, not just in English, but in supporting 19 other languages. Slide 26 shows a picture of the vote by mail package. They're really delightful. They're actually beautiful. They're designed following recommendations from an EAC research project and the requirements of the VVSG. So these are designed to a standard. In 2020, the full voting system was launched. It was called the Voting System for All People. On slide 27, we can jump to that. It's a ballot marking device. It follows the universal design approach. You've seen a piece of that picture before. It's not the accessible voting system. It's the voting system. On the left, it has a tactile controller to complement the touchscreen. It has audio in all 19 languages. And on the right, you can see the ballot box at each station where the printed ballot is stored after it's cast, so that the whole system can be operated without any use of your hands. The process is quite simple, like any ballot marking device. On slide 28, you can see that you first mark the ballot on your ballot on screen. You can see what nice large text they've used. You then go to a review process where you can look at all the selections that the system has captured that you made. And finally, there's a printed ballot that's produced and then cast. It's also designed and built to be robust, to be adaptable to the future, because it's got this strong hardware base, but it's also software. I'll just give you an example of one of the innovative ideas that's included in it on slide 29. It's called the Poll Pass. If you vote in California, you know that you vote on a lot of ballot questions. That's a lot of reading to do in the polls. That's hard for anybody, but it can be especially hard for people with disabilities to go through all of that. So the Poll Pass function lets you use something called the interactive sample ballot to mark your selections at home on a mobile or your computer, and then transfer them through a QR code to either to the VSAP BMD, where you can review them before printing and casting a ballot. It also is the same interface that serves as the overseas voting interface, that serves as the accessible vote by mail, and where you can just look through your ballot if you just want to look through it and remember who you're going to vote for or what you're going to vote for. Getting to this system took 10 years plus. It took funding, largely from the county. It took an incredible leadership from the Los Angeles County Clerk's Office. And it took a lot of technical innovation to figure out all the things that worked. They rolled out in 22 with a little bit of bumpy rollout on the part of the system that checks voters in, but survived that, took it seriously, and continued. All in all, I think it's an innovative, beautiful voting system that has accessibility built in from the start. To be fair, I was on the technical advisory committee, but we really just annoyed them mostly. It was also designed with a lot of community input. There was a community advisory committee, a disabilities advisory committee, a technical advisory committee, plus I'm sure some internal committees. One of the members of one of the other committees said, it was pretty amazing to get to vote on something that I helped create.
Wow, Whitney, thank you again. So this is Alex again, and it looks like we have a bit of time to open the floor up for Q&A, but before we do, Whitney, do you have any closing thoughts you want to send the folks on with?
Sure do. Let's go to slide 30. I always like to send you away with some tweets. So I think the first thing about accessibility in general is to start with intent, because if you don't plan it from the beginning, it doesn't happen. Design guiding principles towards the goals that everybody can understand, and consider how disabilities affect the path to success. The second is to get ahead of the work with preliminary research and keep it going with testing and additional research as you design and develop the system you're building. Involve stakeholders through the process, both for input, so that you're learning from them, and also for transparency, so that they can see what you're developing, and if there's a problem, that will come up organically in the course of that work, just as it would internally. And the last, I'm afraid, is that the work never ends. The image on the screen is just one of my favorite. It's a little rude, but it puts it more dynamically. It's a photograph of a demonstration for curb cuts from many years ago. The center of the picture has a man in a wheelchair holding a sign that says cut the curbs. So I think sometimes it reminds us just to get on with it. Thanks.
This is Dan again. Like, sometimes you just do have to be a little bit blunt when you're really demanding something. Yeah, thank you so much, Whitney.